Welcome everyone to another exciting week of our Mission Matters Twitter Spaces. Today's topic is on how to build and foster company culture. This is going to be an incredible conversation. We have many of our authors and podcasters joining us. So these Twitter Spaces are recorded, so we do share them after. So for many of you that are tuning in, I know this is going to be, we'll have an amazing dialogue. But just to give everyone an introduction, Mission Matters is a multimedia platform really focused on the needs of entrepreneurs, executives, experts. We amplify entrepreneur stories so that we can inspire and educate future generations. On the back end, we're also a full podcast agency. We're managing a network of close to 200 podcasters that we've launched. We also are a book publishing company where we publish nearly 300 authors in a wide variety of books. Many of our podcasters, authors are joining us here. And then we do a lot of PR as well, just to promote and ultimately help people amplify their stories, but then also accomplish their missions. And so with that, we're going to basically go just around the room, have everyone just kind of share their stories, just a quick intro in 30 seconds or so. So maybe why don't we start off with...
Hey, everyone. So I'm Joanna Pineda, CEO and Chief Troublemaker at Matrix Group International. So I run a digital agency that helps associations and nonprofits increase membership and increase revenue. And we do it through websites, custom applications, and I have a virtual and hybrid meeting platform. And that's me. And I'm one of the Mission Matters authors, and I love the community.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joanna. Hey, Christy, feel free to introduce.
Hey, thanks, Chirag. Also one of the Mission Matters authors. I echo Joanna. This is a fantastic community. So much genius in the room. My work has been mainly around value growth for smaller enterprises and have done quite a bit of business expansion work lately. I hold a real estate license in Florida and am a practicing business broker, work in mergers and acquisitions, and especially love it when businesses expand through acquisition. This conversation on company culture is so relevant because enterprise value has a lot to do with the brand and culture that you've created, which I see as two sides of the same coin.
Awesome. Thank you, Christy. Rodney, why don't you feel free to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, Rodney Campbell. I am representing More in Common. Half of the team, Keith Richardson, is my co-founder, and he's off doing the parenting thing. But we are anchoring people and organizations in compassionate conversation with the aim of really making more productive human connection. So we very much love this conversation because we fit into the DEI space, but we really fit into the leadership and HR space of just trying to help people build cultures that are going to be driving to the things they want, which include, their missions, their values, and also making money. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Rodney. And Denley, why don't you feel free to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hello to everyone. Yeah, Denley McIntosh, CEO of Renew IQ Consulting, one half of our dynamic duo partnership with Atenjay McIntosh, who happens to also be my spouse. So in business together, similar to what Ronnie speaks about in terms of the space work, we kind of spread the expertise between building great company culture through uniting head, heart, and hand together. And in that, we take leaders on a journey of culture change through evaluating the human dynamics and the process dynamics of inculcating those changes within the systems, policies, and practices of their workplaces, while at the same time enhancing the leader's ability to be inclusive, diverse, and anti-racist in terms of how to not marginalize groups of people within their workplace. So we focus on leadership development skills through the human sciences, blending into management side to bring culture change and more belonging in the workplace. I'm also an author, podcaster through the Mission Matters community, and thanks for having me on, and look forward to this conversation. Thanks.
Awesome. So maybe why don't we start this off, just the open forum again. And then one quick thing is just remember just to say your name, just because for people that are listening to this on their podcasting channels or even that are just listening just to the audio, I don't think they'll know who you are. So just remember to just say your name after, maybe before you speak. So with that, first question is, why don't we go ahead and just define, what do you call, or what is company culture? Maybe just if anyone wants to just start there.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So my experience kind of spans not-for-profit, government, and private sector. And I guess the common theme through all of that is just the way that people or way that organizations do life in their organization. To me, that's culture. So all that stuff, whether it be not only policies and systems and structures, but it's just the way that they do business with each other, do business with their clients. So it's all the stuff that makes culture. How do they do life in their organization? And when it comes to creating better company culture, part of the journey is that self-awareness or group awareness of how they do life in their organizations before you can now look at what's that future state and what does culture change looks like. So that's my thoughts. That then again, it's just I didn't say my name.
Yeah, so I love that definition, Denley. This is Christine Ralston, and what I would say is for a definition of culture, just kind of a grassroots definition, is it's the way that we have conversations and the way we behave within an organization towards each other and towards those outside the organization. Culture is it's kind of that unconscious driver of behavior, and so being able to define that and bring awareness to that is really powerful.
Hey, so this is Joanna, and at Matrix, my company, we have these company fundamentals that we say are so intertwined with our culture. And so our culture is really defined by what we call kind of the rules of the road, or the kind of the rules to live by. So culture, I guess, defines our environment, how we view our environment, how we should act in our environment, and how should we treat each other. And a long time ago, I had a client who said, Joanna, internally it's culture, but externally it's brand. And we think of brand as like, logo and colors. But I think we need to define brand and really culture as the whole experience. So if you're working with a company, what's the experience of working with them? That's their brand. And I think internally, what's your experience working within the company? That's the culture.
100% agree with you on that, Joanna. It's the human experience internally and externally. We just call it different things, but that's really what it comes down to, isn't it?
Yeah, I definitely echo that, Joanna. I think that when you talk about the stuff of the organization and how people perceive that stuff from the outside, and I was reminded of the the etymology of the word culture, that has this sort of a horticulture, sort of a perspective of plant life. So the plant life, like the ability to grow life within the soil. You plant seeds, you water, you see that plant that grows out of the soil. And culture is the soil. People are the seeds. The experiences that people have are the fruits of how people grow, are being nourished within that environment. And of course, the people who are walking by and seeing the beautiful bloom of flowers on the road, that's the brand of coming over. But I use this metaphor because the life in the organization is very much delicate. If you have the wrong soil, poison soil, toxic soil, life dies in that organization. And so they may just make products, but there's no really true human experience or connections.
Love that. So I guess in your guys' case, or just even at your respective companies, or could be just with since many of you, consult and help companies build their cultures. What have you seen, or like, how do you initially build, or how do you start the process to build the company culture?
I think we talk a lot about values, mission, vision, that kind of work to really define what's the environment we're creating here and why, and what are those defining behaviors and values that we want it to go beyond aspirational and have it become, as part of this unconscious culture, this unconscious expression of who we are.
I mean, I think if you think about it, so like you have someone who starts at your company, the whole experience of starting at the company is the culture, right? Did people expect you? Was your computer ready? Did you have an orientation schedule? Are there people kind of assigned to help you out? Is their work ready for you? That's the culture, right? Like, are they prepared? Are they caring? Are they organized? So, I mean, it's the whole experience.
Yeah, Joanna, and just Denley again. I think the challenge in building culture, especially for large organizations, and there's this sort of renaissance of transforming cultures to this space where people are experiencing their best, they're self-actualizing or self-transcending. It's nice on paper. It's nice to try to delegate that. But what I found here, at least in the work that I do, I take organizations to say, you need to lead in the front. I think there's many ways you can analyze leadership, but when it comes to culture change, you can lead from the back or you can lead from the front. And what I mean by that, when you lead from the back, the advantage of that is time efficiency because you delegate a lot of those things that happen on the ground. The problem with leading from the back and just delegating, your team doesn't see what that culture looks like through you, how you embody, how do you imbibe those values, those norms. So a lot of leaders say, I don't have time to lead from the front, which is the contrast I want to draw, where you're actually on the ground, you're sharing the stories, you're showing people how the values can be embodied. A lot of leaders don't have time to do that. They don't want to do that. But guess what? You can't have true transformation of your culture. And if you're trying to really have the right kind of culture that Joanna, you just shared, it requires leaders to really make that extra effort to lead out front, showing on the ground with those boots on, this is what it looks like. Not to take away people's work, not to take away people's or micromanage, but you give people a model, you give people a demonstration. And that's how people say, I got it. I see it in action because I saw you lead from the front, not just from behind.
And so taking what both Joanna and Denley said and putting it together, I mean, it's intentional structure, right? To guide the way that we behave and the way that we speak. And, where do we show up and how does that look? And guidance requires leadership. And so I love that idea of the front or the back of the organization. That's, fascinating hybrids, I think, could be created from that.
Completely. And I guess we can get a little more specific now or just more granular. What are some qualities of really good company cultures that maybe you're implementing in your business or that you've come across?
I will tell you, there are two things about our culture that I really, really try to instill in new people, among other things. But number one is be curious and go deep. And number two is within Matrix Group, this is Joanna, by the way, assume good intentions. I think those two things make for curious, interesting people who are willing to really learn about something and go deep and know as much as they can and be helpful. But when you pair that with assume good intentions, so if I'm asking Chirag a whole bunch of questions, if I don't assume good intentions, I might be like, hey, buddy, why are you asking me all these questions? Is it because you think I'm not doing a good job? Or is it because you want to take my job? But if I assume good intentions, it'll be like, oh yeah, Chirag just wants to know about this. Let me tell you about it. So those two things, I think, at least in my company culture, are two things that we try and reinforce those all the time.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. Thanks, Joanna and Denley again. I think one of the things I oversee several hundred people within a community, a workplace community, I like to call it, where we have this amazing culture where we have interns all the way to C-suites collaborating from different walks of life, different racial groups, different cultural groups, coming together for one purpose. How do we do life at work better? And so one of the things that I have done to do that is the onboarding, but more than onboarding, I kind of use a little bit of a Walmart model in the sense of the celebration, this sort of recognition. Kind of took a little bit of that and say, how do I let people know this is the environment that you're coming into? You're coming into an environment that celebrates each other. You're coming into an environment that we are very much curious. We're concerned about your career development. We're concerned that we don't leave you behind. And to be able to embody that and then practice that, especially in a virtual environment, of reaching out and allowing people to tell their stories and share their stories is one of the ways that we do that. So the curiosity, to build on Joanna, curiosity looks like for us is tell me more. Like if we're assuming good intent, we are looking at each other and say, what do you mean by that? Just in case I understood what you just said, can you share more? I want to maybe offer you an alternative view. Would you be open to that? Those sort of conversations is what we practice regularly. And They talk about leading in the front. I have to practice regularly. I have to demonstrate that with my community of people. And by doing that, it just allows people to say, this is like the best space I could be. And people find healing, people find wellness, people find wholeness, because we're just doing things to say, we're on this journey together. How do we practice making a good culture together? And it could come from assuming positive intent, like Joanna said, being curious, and then even going further to say, we miss you. How are you doing? What can we do to make your life better?
Are there, just curious, I guess, in terms of culture, are there no-nos, or is there anything that you would not recommend, or, just right off?
I heard Chirag, I heard correctly, what are the no-go zones in building culture?
Yeah, more or less, yes.
Yeah, I guess for me, the no-go zones in building culture, don't treat it as a project or initiative. Treat this as part of your using Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and one of the part of the hierarchy, self-actualization. And even some say Maslow had another step. It was self-transcendent. Either in terms of that echelon of growth, you have to see building culture as a leader as part of your own growth process, which you never truly arrive. You're on a journey, and there should be demonstration of change, but you can never say, I got it there. And so with culture, people treat it like, well, this is a project. Look, we're going to have culture change, and we're going to do this within a year. And 3 years, we're going to have this amazing. If you look at it as some kind of like hardcore metrics, and you have to have a deadline, I think you have the wrong approach to that, because then you just see this as really just work, where what we're talking about culture, it's the how work. How do we do that? And that requires an intentionality that's we shared over than hardcore KPIs. What does the culture look like? I mean, you need some of that, but if you just do that and you don't get the qualitative aspect right, and you see this as a really fly-by-night scheme, then I think you're going to be doing it wrong. And people will see this as you're making them a means to an end rather than an end to themselves. So those are some of my thoughts, Anne Lucy.
Definitely. What great insights. This is Christy Morel Stinson. I mean, the biggest no-no that I have seen many times is the leadership of a company or an individual at the top, kind of declaring this is the culture and trying to do that through, some kind of, like you said, initiative or project, but there isn't a way for that to touch the ground, and they're not demonstrating it. And authenticity has to come from every layer of the organization. It has to come from the top down, if you look at it like that, and then penetrate every layer of the organization and really engage people in creating the culture together with a framework of some kind.
Christy, I totally agree with you. This is Joanna. I think you're right. If you have leaders who kind of declare that this is the culture, but then they either violate the culture or tolerate people violating the culture, then that's like your no-no, right? Like, so if you say, okay, so if I say, hey guys, I'll give you an example. So this is silly example, but I had a staff member who came into my office, true story, and she said, Joanna, there's a meeting that I need to be part of and I wasn't invited. And I said, oh God, that's terrible. Go talk to the project manager and ask to be invited. And she said, no, I think she excluded me. And I said, I don't really think so. I said, what does she have against you? Go. And she said, nope, there's no way. I just think I don't know what to do. I was excluded, but I need to be part of this meeting. And I said, swear to God, you should just go into the project manager's office and say, can I be part of this meeting? So very reluctantly, she came in. She comes back in my office 5 minutes later and says, you're right. She fat fingered the invite. And I think that if I had fed into oh my God, you think you got excluded? Well, this is terrible. Do you want me to talk to the project manager and see why she excluded you? Then I would have been, I don't know, like not living up to the ideals of the assumed good intentions. And I think I would have undermined the culture just a little bit. I'll also say one thing. My coach, I have a business coach, and he's very fond of reminding me that CEOs get the organizations they deserve. So what are we tolerating in our organizations that is making them less than amazing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's a good point. One of the things that especially in the space of doing anti-racism and culture change, from helping leaders consider the ways that they are not marginalizing group people, And one of the things I find that organizations are doing, and many times they don't think that D&I is effective because they delegate the culture change to the ground instead of the frontline operation manager to do that. And when I get asked, would you help? Would you speak? The first question I ask in my training, in this sort of training request, is your CEO going to be there? Is your VP going to be there? And they say, nope. I said, I'm not interested in doing it. Why not? You don't understand. Culture is driven from the top and reinforced from the bottom. It's not the other way around, because I can't fire my boss. And so at the end of the day, if the leader says, no, we're going to do X, I don't have time for this D&I stuff, I don't have time for this culture stuff, and the people at the bottom are going to say, okay, they're going to cower to a culture of fear, a culture where the leader at the end of the day is going to default to their survival mechanism, that reptilian part of the brain where you're not thinking about the other, you're thinking about my own paycheck, my own preservation. In order to release that tension, that culture of fear, it has to be driven from the top. It has to be modeled there and not delegated, but leading from the front. Otherwise, you don't get the culture change and you get the organization Joanna said you deserve. So those are one of the things that I try to really reinforce with leaders. You have to take the time to learn and learn together. Don't delegate that responsibility to the bottom. It won't stick. That's generally speaking.
Yeah, you can ask. So, how there are cultures, especially if you walk into them, sometimes there's a lot of changes that need to take place, right? And whether you're bringing on an outside consultant, I guess the question is how do you really foster that change, especially when a company that's existed, let's say for like 10 years, 10, 20 years, and there's just so much of a pedigree there. And there's just, there's just a lot of bad culture. It could be habits that have been formed over time. How do you go about changing a lot of those habits or creating change in something that's, been around for so long?
Hey, so this is Joanna. We had a staff person who I will call a hostage. And I was like, my God, why are we putting up with this terrible attitude? And her boss kept saying, but she's so amazing. She's so amazing. She's so wonderful. I can't live without her. She's amazing. But she was a terrorist, in the organization. People were afraid of her. And she wasn't collaborative. It was not good for the organization. And finally, we had something happen in the organization, and I basically let her go. And, people were like, oh my God, how are we going to survive without her? And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. But, eventually people were like, that was the right thing to do. She was really holding the organization hostage. And I found someone so much better, like equally competent, if not more so, with a lovely disposition. And this is many years ago, but for me, it was like the lesson that you should not put up with that. Like that just can't be tolerated. And a long time ago, I was listening to a speaker. He said, in an organization, he said, I give you a year to learn a new job, but I give you a weekend to get a new attitude.
Joanna, I think that your case story there is so descriptive, of one of the key points that anyone building culture would be wise to pay attention to. And that is talent is negotiable, but culture is never negotiable.
Yeah. I think those tough conversations have to be had. When I look to onboard people in our community, I'm very clear. I said, listen, this community may not be for you. And the reason I'm belaboring what we're all about, what we want to do, who we are, why I'm here personally doing this. I don't delegate who we are to others. I mean, I could. It's more efficient, but I want to be crystal clear because it's coming from the horse's mouth. So there's no equivocation of what we stand for. And if this doesn't resonate with you, that's okay. We can agree to disagree. Let's do it agreeably. Let's make sure that this is the point of departure on friendly terms rather than drag something out that doesn't work. And I think I tell leaders, you really need to be crystal clear of who you are and be confident and say, you know what, if I'm going to make a decision, which literally means cut off all alternatives, that's what it means in the etymology. If this is a decision, this is who we are, don't be gray, don't be ambiguous, be very clear and recognize there will be people who will drop off. That's the whole point of making a decision. Not everyone's going to be journeying with you, but when you live in that gray, that murkiness, guess what? You just have other things that stick on you that doesn't need to stick and come along with you on the journey. And so to Joanne's point, when you're very clear, people will drop off. better people will come along board. When I say better, in terms of your vision, in terms of your strategy, who you want your organization to be. So make a clear decision, be very clear with people, and expect people to drop off, but expect better people to come on board afterward, generally speaking.
Awesome. And then I guess, are there any good examples of company cultures that people can model themselves after? Big companies, small companies, and then maybe what about them? Maybe like specific examples that you guys have come across that maybe others can learn from?
Hey, it's Joanna. Have you guys heard of Netflix's Culture Deck? So just Google for the Netflix Culture Deck. And it's basically like, I think it's what new hires get. And it became so popular that they made it public. And one of the things that Reed Hastings says is you can't tolerate talented jerks because the cost to company culture is too great. It's actually a really good deck. I borrow from it.
I'll look to inherit that. It's an interesting question when it comes to larger organizations because the multinational corporation, those global 500, I guess it really depends where about in the world, right? I can say Walmart is a great culture. Maybe some people say it's not, and maybe in the UK versus Brazil or Argentina or versus Canada. So it's a hard question to answer from that sort of perspective. But what I see about Walmart, I mean, I did made an allusion to it, is the fact that when I go in the mornings, early mornings, do a run to avoid the Walmart crowd, on the ground, this attitude of seeing their team, like they bring some of that pep rally spirited thing that you see in sports, and they bring it into the retail space. And their conferences, those Walmart conferences where people come from all over the world to talk about the Walmart way and remembering the story. They do a good job of bringing them back to why they are here, why Sam Walton started Walmart. It's this opportunity to give access to the little people who can afford some of the high-end merchandises. So I think one of the things that I'm impressed about them is the bringing back of the vision, to humanize the experiences, to bring energy. So it's no surprise they stand always to the top 3 global companies in the world because they know how to motivate and drive people to see the essence of it's just not selling food, it's just not selling clothing. You're making a life for people. And I think that's important.
Love that. I was actually going to add 2 companies that I learned from early on in my career. Read a couple books, but one was Zappos. Unfortunately, rest in peace, Tony Hsieh. But I think one of the best books that I read on culture was their book. Funny enough, I think like one of the things about their culture is that like you could call their customer service team and ask them any question and they would find it. I actually tested it out. I actually called their customer service team and I asked them for the best local taco trucks in the area that I could find in Chicago because I was living in Chicago for a couple of years, and the guy actually sent me a list and gave me the name of like 4 or 5 taco trucks. I kind of felt bad, so I did end up buying. I think I bought like a pair of like a couple of shoes that I ended up seeing, but it ended up just something that I kind of came across early on. Another company is also Disney. I feel like at their theme park specifically, they do a great job of training. I mean, considering how many, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees they have across not just the US, but I guess the world, I feel like they've done a remarkable job of making sure that all their staff are really well trained, always, there with a smile on their face. And, the kids always do come back with a happy time.
Hey, this is Rodney. Yeah, Disney's a good one. I've actually talked to a couple of employees there and heard really good things, really good feedback, because I think it'd be really easy for it to be like just this massive machine that chugs people out. Other ones that I would add are, and by the way, you all have had some beautiful, wonderful things to say. My connection has been terrible, so I've just been kind of listening. You are all brilliant. Costco and In-N-Out out here in the West Coast in LA where I am, part of what I look at for company culture is just like how am I treated as a customer, as somebody who's not part of it. When I talk to employees about their experience and their opportunity inside of the system and the things I hear about Costco and the way they move seem to be positive. I mean, obviously nothing's 100% positive, and then In-N-Out as well, in a fast food environment where things can definitely be assembly line like. Teams have, in my experience, so this is super anecdotal, but been really, really positive, smiles. They take care of the restaurants. They are clean. And that's, it's one of those things you can train, but you can't really make people care about the place that they're working at unless your culture actually cares about the place that you're working at. So it's something that sticks
out?
Ronnie, this is Denley. With Costco, I don't know the ins and outs, but I would echo what I heard third hand, that when people go to Costco, become the Costco team, they don't really leave. What I recall, and this is over a decade ago, they were paying their cashiers $40K, $50K for cashiers, and it was like unheard of. And then CEO Jim Sinhala, if I pronounce the name correctly, he was one of the lowest paid CEOs that were out there. And Costco at that time was Fortune 500. I think there still are. But the fact that he paid his cashiers more than market rate to actually give them a living, and then him as a CEO would be, I think he was paid at the time like 300K, 500, considering a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, which you would expect in the millions. He didn't see that being appropriate. And so that always stuck with me. And I haven't really heard a lot of organization profile Costco in a way that would speak to the fact of culture. Because if a CEO is willing to take a pay cut and live within some level of reasonable means and live and raise the standard of living for those who are working on the front line, I think that's something to be commended and something we shouldn't overlook.
Yeah, they have a really interesting. You can't just get hired in as like a manager or director there. Like you've got to work your way up. So you'll meet somebody at the front door who's a cashier who's bagging your groceries who's got a master's degree in business. Like they've got to work their way up. So they've got to learn like all of the ins and outs and how does this work from the carts to the parking lot to the back room to stocking to issues with memberships. Like they have to learn all of that before they can move up into the back office.
I've noticed that our conversation has focused a lot on really big companies and how culture shows up there. And I noticed that on our title up here, and this is Christy Morel Stinson, I noticed on our title up here that we say arts and culture, entrepreneurship, and startups. So I just wanted to throw that out there and say, I'd love to hear advice and maybe share a little of my own about how culture is relevant to startups and early stage businesses. So I'll kind of, kick that off, and it might be, Chirag, that you wanted to go a different direction with this, but maybe just a few seconds on this. For startups, it all begins with the founder, and if it's a set of founders, they've got to be united about that culture. And those first hires are going to be really critical to align with a vision for where this company is going and what matters. And, that Simon Sinek golden circle thinking of, why does this matter? And if we have alignment at the core, then we can build the right culture across time.
Yeah, Christy, this then again. Yeah, I think for startups, it's an interesting question because you take time to cultivate and develop a capacity in your technical expertise. If you are developing the latest app, you're coding, and that's your bread and butter, and you are an expert in that. And does the soft skills come into play? The people skills, I'm sure it is in terms of sales, but the startups, they're looking at those sort of technical acumen pieces. And so I guess part of it is, what are investors looking for? Because investors say, I'm all about, the smart and quick whippersnappers. Yeah, you're kind of rough around the edges, but that's okay. You're going to make me a lot of money. The investor says, hey, in the long run, people skills really do matter. I think part of it's where people are investing their money or how they see value. I do agree that I think in this sort of culture and looking at Gen Zs that are coming, it's the ability to do both, have that technical, have that people side very much integrated, very much holistic. So I do think that for startups, it's having a leader that sees things very holistically, which is not easy because we're all growing, but to say both are important, building my technical acumen and having the political or the business acuity and the human acuity to move this forward in a sustainable way.
Hey, this is Rodney. I am hard pressed to name startups and their culture because it's hard to, unless you're in it, unless you're working in it, it's hard to say. And so many startups have to make a transition from their founders into growth. I don't know of any that I would call out right now as like an example of good culture, because I believe that was the original sentiment. Like, what companies would you point to doing it well or that have done it well? So I'm not sure I'm not sure what startups I would point to, but I think it is an important point to say that, like, it is, man, if you can get it right in the startup phase, life can be so much easier down the road. Because I think so many companies end up having to do a complete restart. Like, of all this stuff we're talking about right now, they have to learn all this at some point down the road, because they are just devs. They are just and technicians that are super good at a thing. And then they're like, oh crap, we need people to do this for us, because like we don't know how to sell, or we don't know how to go get more funding, or we need to get Series B or whatever it is. And they have no clue how to do it. And they're like, okay. HR says we got to treat people well and we got to have values.
Mhm. Well, Chirag, I think a lot of that is true unless they work with a startup consultant like what I've provided in the past, where we do, talk about these key decisions really early on, so that we're building enterprise value in, and we're following, that E-Myth framework of, you're not a technician anymore. You're an entrepreneur now. So you've got to think like a leader, right? I think the reason that I wanted to touch on that, Chirag, is because, when people are tuning into this, and they're just hearing about gigantic companies, they may not realize how culture is relevant at every stage of that entrepreneurial growth.
Oh, completely agree. Yeah. Yeah. This was always intended to be for whatever, would make sense. And I feel like there are more startups, mid-sized, small mom and pop shops that are there. And I think there's more employees and there's more people working at these smaller companies than there are larger ones. So definitely, I think it makes complete sense to address that.
Yeah, definitely. Again, what Christy just shared about getting it right from the start, and I alluded to the fact that culture is really, it's the how of the business, how you do life, and it's the how of the business that allows growth to happen, not just monetarily, but now this realization, this understanding that people do matter. We're no longer in the industrial dinosaur age where people are just cogs in the wheel and they're just pressing buttons on automotive manufacturing line. We want to see people flourish. And so the how that business needs to be tilled, it needs to be fertilized, it needs to be cared for. And that underlying, that foundation is going to take a little bit of time, but it's worth it to know that you have a habit that's been set in that environment. I guess maybe you can throw P&G in there in terms of they focus on having the right set of people in there. And so they take a lot of time to find the people because they have a particular culture they want to maintain. So yeah, getting it right at the start is important. And if we remember that the culture is the how of the organization, where people are planted so they can flourish, then all the stuff that we do in that organization is all pointing back to people and how they can be their best.
Awesome. So, usually we keep these conversations about like an hour, and I know we're nearing it. Wanted to see if anyone here has any final questions for one another or any final comments before we wrap up.
Chirag, this is Joanna. I do need to run. This has been really terrific. I care a lot about this topic and I appreciate you guys' insights. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Joanna. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna.
Yep.
Bye.
Thanks, Joanna.
Yep. I guess just for anyone, any final questions, comments, anything that you guys want to chime in on before we wrap up?
This is Christy Morelstons, and I just, I think my summary comment is that culture really matters. It's worth investing in. It's something you can't shortcut, and it ties directly to transferable enterprise value, regardless of the size of your company.
Yeah, I guess it's definitely. Yeah, I would just say that culture it's one of those ambiguous things for people because it's so broad, yet it's so important. And I would just encourage people that treat the human sciences as important as the management sciences or the physical sciences. And I think people are coming to an awareness that the human sciences matter, whether it be understanding anthropology, sociology, psychology, philosophy, human theology, all those sort of things matter in terms of now how do we best understand people from the various lens that they come in, the various lived experience. That's hard for managers and leaders to consider, like, oh my gosh, I have to learn a little bit. You don't have to, but I would encourage you need to, because if you want to build culture is all about people, and you have to understand people in the many facets that they bring their whole selves into the place. And I encourage people to read a little bit about philosophies, understand people's beliefs and worldviews, read a little bit about anthropology, understand the cultures, read a little bit about psychology, because wellness is a key piece. Read a little bit about sociology, because then you start to understand systems and systemic barriers. All of that is going to be part and parcel of the new leader that needs to understand a lot of those core pieces to cultivate the kind of culture they're looking for that makes people feel like they belong.
Love that.
I love that. Chirag, if you don't mind, I'm going to add one thought. I think kind of adding on what this is Rodney here, but like adding what Christy and Denley just said, like culture is not a zero-sum game. And while it can feel squishy and soft, it is absolutely not, because we all know you know what? Actually, hopefully we don't all know, but unfortunately, I think we do all know what it's like to be in a bad culture. And at the end of the day, your team is not going to perform if they're scared, or if there's a fear thing going on. And we want our teams to perform their best. We want people to be their best, and that has to do with our culture and how we treat people.
People who feel cared for, I agree with you so 100%, Rodney. People who feel cared for and they know that the organization has their back is not going to tolerate, something that doesn't reflect the company's values and someone else's behavior, regardless of what position they hold in the company. That's really powerful. And that can affect engagement one way or the other.
100%. 100%. And it's, we talked about some big companies. We can look at the startups that have become big. We can talk about sports teams. We can talk about a lot of different areas where culture plays in. Families, dynamics between friends. What's the difference between the great ones and the bad ones? It's the culture. It's how people communicate. It's the frameworks that they have in place. It's the frameworks they have in place for keeping each other safe and being able to communicate honestly, and then moving through that when there's disagreement. Disagreement isn't the problem. It's how we move through it and the language that we have or don't have to help us move through it. And, those are some of the things to think about as we look in our organizations to make, and I'm air quoting, better culture. We really have to define that for ourselves. Everybody's got to say what they want out of their culture, and then go make it. Like Christy and both them have said, leaders need to set that and then live it, and then let that trickle down. So really appreciate you all. And Chirag, thanks for the platform and the time. It's been fun.
Yeah, fantastic. So just to wrap up, we host these conversations and dialogues once a week, every Thursday. Next week's dialogue is going to be, how do you create innovation within your company and with your staff and with your team? And so that's going to be at 7 p.m. EST for all these East Coast. Looking forward to having you guys all back once again. And thank you so much for contributing to this dialogue. Hope you all have a great evening.
Thanks, Chirag. Thanks for inviting us. And I think next week we'll build really well on this topic. It's going to be in the next extension.
Thanks, Chirag. And nice meeting you too, Christy and Rodney.
You too.
You all do well.
Thanks.
Take care, guys.
Everyone. Bye.